This is David Tulis, and I appreciate you giving me just a couple minutes every time. We're brought to you by Nooganomics.com, the website for the man who matters in Chattanooga, the one that explores, you could say, the deep state, insofar as Tennessee has a deep state. There are signs of its gains, if you will, signs of its gains, signs of threats to its hegemony at Nooganomics.com. If you don't know what hegemony means, look it up. This is David Tulis. And that's why I'm not popular, because I use words like that. Hegemony simply means control over the whole of. And the United States has hegemony worldwide, even though it's fractured, it's dissipating, and it is not. It is military. It's not of love anymore. People are dread the United States and fear it around the world. We're looking to have in Chattanooga gain and prosperity. I would say God's blessings, as well as God's judgment on the whole and on the part. We are in the part, and the whole, of course, is the national economy, debt-based, highly sclerotic, highly constipated, not functioning very well, and with each new dollar of credit injected into the economy, less and less gain. We're trying to buy ourselves into prosperity with debt, and it's not working. So the system is coming to an end. It can't really make any gains. It can't really grow the economy, as they say. Despite 10 years of cheap credit, the economy is not growing as much as they want. So there are problems, hard to explain, hard really to understand. And we're looking at the pieces here and trying to figure out what the whole looks like by looking at the details. In Venezuela, we have a socialist government run by Nicolas Maduro, who is an active socialist, he's a good Democrat, but he's also a good Republican in a lot of ways, and is bringing his country to the edge of itself by controls of the economy, nationalizations of businesses, and restrictions against the liberties of the people of Venezuela, a huge and wealthy country, an exporting country, importing now almost all of its essentials, including toilet paper. To consider what's going on there, we have Sam Spade here in the studio. Sam, give my listener just a quick sketch, since we haven't given details on my show. What is going on in Venezuela, and why should we care?
Well, the big problem in Venezuela is the government has tried to take over control of most of the economy, and they've done this by printing money, by using debt money. If they didn't have the ability to create money out of debt, they wouldn't have the ability to make this attempt. So really the enabler of the situation in Venezuela, maybe the enabler of that same situation all over the world, is the fact that the government has the ability to create money out of thin air by debt.
Which is to say it has a modern banking system and a central bank.
That is correct. That is correct. The central bank and the modern banking system are the two important keys. To give you a specific example, if the government decides, because one of its friends comes in and says, hey, I want to buy out the several city blocks in Chattanooga, and I'd like a loan, even though I don't have good credit, and even though I probably can't pay it back unless this comes off, but you guys like me, I'd like the loan. And because they like him, and he's an important person politically, the Federal Reserve gives him a large loan. Now, he got that loan for free, which means he can bid against anybody else who has to work for their living, outbid them, and buy all that land.
Who are not as well connected with
exactly.
that firsthand. That's probably he's not getting the loan directly from the Fed, but a major national bank,
who gets the money from the Fed. So, right. So I mean, the thread all goes through the banking system.
A party close to the spigot,
exactly.
Getting the gush.
Exactly. And so the net result is the parties close to the spigot get very, very rich, and everybody else gets steadily poor. And that's the reason we have a concentration of wealth here in the country.
Well, you sound like Bernie Sanders. How is it that the Democratic analysis from the Bernie Sanders camp, the socialists, how is it that their analysis in some part is correct? Because they talk about all American oligarchs just as we do here on the free market side.
I sound like Bernie Sanders?
Well, he and people like him keep talking about ending concentrations of wealth and so on, don't they?
Well, yeah, but they're going to do that not by eliminating the source of the wealth at the concentration of wealth at the start, which is by eliminating debt money. They're going to do it by making the government bigger and more powerful, and an attempt to crack down on this elite few that are sitting there at the spigot. If they manage to do that, all they're going to do is clear away the path for another set of elite few who happen to be their buddies. So, Bernie Sanders' solution is really take those bastards out and put my bastards in, so to speak. Pardon my French.
Right. And so the Democrat argument, and even that of the Republican Party, is centralization. We have a problem here caused by these elites. They're choking off supply. They're raising prices, let's say, of medical insurance. And so we've got to have a single payer system, because that's look at the ruin we have with insurance companies in charge of the medical reimbursements sector.
Yes. And what they're really running up against is the fact that anytime you eliminate competition, I don't care what sector it's in, I don't care what's involved. If you eliminate competition, you wind up with only a few who control the resulting structure becoming very wealthy and everybody else getting poor. And that's true in the medical sector. That's the reason we have a few who have tremendously good medical care and the vast majority of us who do not. And as long as you have a restrictions and control, a semi-monopolistic, if not truly monopolistic, medical system, that's what you're going to have.
Well, I'm sure the listener has heard about the Floridian county, I'm not remembering which one now, that had inspectors go out immediately after Hurricane Harvey, or was it Irma? Did you hear about those stories, Bob?
Yes, it's
Sam,
hilarious.
What happened with the inspectors dropping
No,
in?
you're doing fine. Go on.
Well, the inspectors dropped in on people who had swimming pools and said, you are in violation. And this is David Tulis, and caller, you're live on the air. Thanks for calling. 800-8949. What's on your mind?
You touched on my favorite topic, the money issue. Good morning, Sam Spade. Nice to hear you back on the air.
Well, good morning. It's nice to be here.
What's interesting about this is the law. It always comes back to the law. Okay, we know what the Bernie Sanders of the world want to do. They just want the central power in the hands of the government. Look at the Communist Manifesto.
Right.
But in the hands of the state.
Absolutely.
They don't want it in the hands of a private corporation called the Federal Reserve Banking System with a 12-member bank. We always have to go back to the Bible and the Constitution. The Constitution forbids paper currency to be passed on as so-called legal tender. As a matter of fact, the term legal tender is not even mentioned in the Constitution.
Unfortunately,
mentions under Article 1, Section 8. Congress shall have the power.
I have to disagree with you. It prohibits it for the states, but it does not prohibit it for the federal government, as far as I'm aware.
Well, if you understand how the Constitution works, you wouldn't even make a statement like that.
Go on, explain it.
The federal government's not, listen to me, the federal government is not prohibited from doing anything. The federal government is granted specific limited powers.
Yes.
The states are denied powers. Article 1, Section 8 grants the specific limited powers of the federal government. That specific limited power is Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof in a foreign coin, and to borrow money on the faith and credit of the United States. Roger Sherman, who was one of the signatories to the Constitution, argued against the emission of bills of credit in Philadelphia, and that was struck. He said, never again will paper money be allowed to be emitted by the federal government. So the federal government is not authorized to create legal tender laws, legal tender acts. They are authorized to coin money and regulate the value thereof, and to borrow money on the faith and credit of the United States. Now, if you look at the states, those states shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender and payment of debts. Article 1, Section 10.
That's very clear. Very clear.
Article 1, Section 10.
Very clear.
And let's go one step further. There's a difference between a debt, a state debt, and a state tax. A debt arises from contract expressed or implied. So the state can choose to receive whatever it wants in payment to itself, because state taxes are not debts. They're involuntary exactions. But if you and I contract, that contract is a debt, and the state can only impel what is considered to be the money of account of the United States, which is gold and silver coin.
Right.
The federal government, when the federal government assesses anything, anyone, that assessment becomes a debt.
Mm-hmm.
And that debt must be paid in the money of account of the United States, which is gold and silver coinage. That is the law. That is the history of the country. And the Supreme Court, this is interesting, has never ruled otherwise, other than to say in Juilliard versus Greenman that because of the Civil War, you can emit bills of credit because ultimately it will be paid. And they said in that decision, we're not saying they even have any value, or their dollars or their money. But because of the crises, you could temporarily admit these because its ultimate destiny is to be paid. Well, the Federal Reserve note is not a note, promises no redemption. A dollar's unit of measurement, it's not a thing. So we have total tyranny and unconstitutionality going on. The federal government, Sam Spade, can't do it because they weren't giving authorization under Article 1, Section 8. And if they're not authorized to do it, they can't do it.
All right, the question I have, Mike, is this. What is, just in a nutshell here, make it quick, what is the result of this emission of credit from the central bank? What is the result to my listener?
The same thing under the Articles of Confederation. What happens is, if you purchase a house for $10,000 in 1868 and sell it today for $350,000, that house is not worth $350,000. By creating more units of purchasing power, you devalue every one that's there. So if David Tulis put $10,000 in his mattress in 1968, that is devalued to almost zero. But on top of that, that house that now you just sold for $350,000 that you bought for $10,000, you're going to have to pay a profit and gain tax on that and purchase the exact same house for $350,000. So the house didn't go up in value. The currency went down in value because the government consistently produces more money. Did you hear Yellen the other day? She's disappointed that inflation was so low. Inflation is the inflation of inflating the money supply. She wants 3% growth. She wants you to lose 3% of your money every year.
It's actually closer to 8 right now.
It has a set of things that it does. First of all, it
okay,
creates...
Mike, wrap it up.
We're debtors. And debtors can never have anything of value. A debtor is servant to the lender. It's perpetual indebtedness. You can never pay anything off. It is pure evil. It's ungodly. It's unconstitutional. It's not lawful. Every single legal tender law that was ever passed is unconstitutional on its face, period.
Thanks, Mike. All right, Bob, say something about what Mike's been discussing with us.
Well, I listen to people talk about points like Mike has made, and I'm by the way, Mike, for what it's worth, I am influenced by your argument concerning the Constitution restricting the use of paper by the federal government. I'd never really heard that argument made in the way you made it, and I thank you for that. But in the end, I see the same situation as I saw in the Middle Ages with the Catholic Church, which was everybody was sitting around and arguing about how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. Practically, the Constitution has become a dead letter in this country. Practically, laws have become dead letters because the courts are controlled by the people who have already decided what the decision is going to be. So the issues that we need to think about are how can we survive and thrive without having to argue how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin.
Well, Sam, I think you're not being quite fair about what theological debates really are about, even with the schoolmen versus the Reformation. But this is David Tulis, and we're talking with Sam Spade, and we're trying to get to the issue about government cartels and government ownership of professions. We were mentioning how after one of the storms, either Irma or Harvey, no, it was after Irma, that Florida inspectors came the day after, when the dust was still in the air from the storm, telling people you're in violation because your swimming pool does not have a barrier around it. And at that point, and one other point, they were cited, and they were told that they were written warnings. If you don't have this taken care of immediately, you're going to be cited to court.
The fence was not in good shape. Yes.
Yeah, the fence was not in good shape, so people might fall in. All right, people may fall into your pool. Your pool dirtied with debris and leaves and pieces of palm trees. And the story also that touches on the same question of government ownership of property that you think belongs to you is visible in the food truck story out of Green Cove Springs, Florida. Irma wreckage. There's a man named Jack Roundtree who runs Triple J Barbecue, and he was told, well, you can't even give away food to hungry residents and utility workers in your town because you don't have a permit. So you have to shut down and go. Now the stores in that town were wrecked, and he was told you are forbidden from plying your trade and even selling or giving away sandwiches, drinks, and French fries and chips and the like because you don't have the proper permit. So this is a humiliation of local economy there and the free market. Now, Sam, let's get to Venezuela again. What's happening in Venezuela, particularly on the decline of value of the paper currency of that country and the rise of alternative sharing economy, distributed economy mediums or media such as Bitcoin? What's the Bitcoin story versus the local currency there?
Well, what's significant about Bitcoin, if you take a look at the chart of Bitcoin and its price, and you compare it with the political events and economic events going on around the world, you'll see that the spikes in Bitcoin all occur because of some political or economic event that occurred in some country to cause a sudden need for currency that was not controlled by the country. And to take an example, the first big spike came with the Cyprus situation. Cyprus got in trouble. They shut down the banks. They nationalized a lot of people's money in the banks with bail-ins.
That's called go ahead.
And bail-ins, yes. And as a result, a lot of people said, hey, I'm getting out of the Cypriot currency. And Cyprus is a very well-developed, stabilized Western country. This is not a little African hole. So we are seeing now the same situation in Zimbabwe, which is an African hole, but nonetheless is the same kind of problem. And we're seeing it in Venezuela as well. Because of the crises in this country, because there are relatively few people that own Bitcoin, it doesn't take a big country to go into crisis to make the price spike. A small country can do it. And Venezuela is an example of one thing.
So recently there were 100 users in the Bitcoin exchanges, and now there are 85,000 users, according to Tyler Durden, writing at zerohedge.com.
Exactly. And the reason this is important is because if you think about just in the U.S., the dollar, we really have two kinds of dollars. We have the paper dollar that you hold in your pocket, and that's a dollar that you can use for face-to-face transactions. And then we have the electronic dollar, which you never see because it physically doesn't exist. And you can use that to buy things from Amazon online or remotely if you want to buy a tanker of oil out of a Wyoming factory. So if you can sit here and you can say, well, we can always use gold in our economy. But gold is the first class of money. It's the equivalent of that paper dollar.
And a tiny bit of gold is worth a huge amount in dollars or
that is true.
Venezuelan currency.
That is true. But you can say silver, you can say cigarettes, you can say any of the physical equity money. That requires a face-to-face exchange. And that's not suitable for remote transactions. So if you're in Venezuela and you say, my God, I want to buy a tanker full of food to bring in to sell in my grocery store, or I want to bring in a tanker full of medicines, a shipping box full of medicines, you have to have the cooperation of the banking system to do that. And in Venezuela, the banking system has stopped, just like it has stopped in Cyprus, just like it is stopping in other parts of the world. People are very concerned about. What do you do? Well, right now, there's only one alternative to the banking system, and that is Bitcoin. And that's the reason the use of Bitcoin is exploding.
Wouldn't a Federal Reserve dollar, the green rectangle, be better in Venezuela than Bitcoin, Sam Spade? Because Bitcoin requires that the grid be up, right? A green rectangle will operate if the grid is down.
Well, no remote transaction system, no remote form of money will operate if there's no communications to carry it. The dollar is just like any other form of bearer instrument, in that it's great for conducting face-to-face transactions, but Venezuela puts in currency controls and makes it impossible for you to go overseas with your dollars to buy something. If they catch you at the airport, you're in trouble. So how do you go remotely to buy something in quantity? Again, you're down to only two ways to do that. You either get the banking system to agree with you, and when you're talking about places like Venezuela or Cyprus, or even in many instances the United States, that becomes a nightmare, if not outright impossible. Or you go to Bitcoin, which are unregulated and uncontrolled in any way by anybody. And therefore, you can go overseas, buy it, and get it.
Well, the dictator Maduro in Venezuela, Sam Spade, is going after the miners, the infrastructure for Bitcoin. He's saying that if you're involved in Bitcoin, you're misusing electricity, you're undermining the nation's economy, and there are raids. People are being charged with cyber crimes, theft, exchange fraud, and even funding terrorism, according to Zero Hedge.
Well, there's two issues here, and I don't want to get them conflated because it's important to keep them distinct in your mind. And one is the use of Bitcoin as money, and the other is the creation of Bitcoin through mining, because there's no printing process with Bitcoin. It's actually a matter of work and electricity to make a Bitcoin. It takes a lot of effort. That's what makes Bitcoin scarce, is it's so expensive to produce. Now, Maduro's complaint is people in his country are stealing electricity to use to mine
to run
Bitcoins.
their computer.
That's a different issue from the fact that most people in their country are now trying to use Bitcoin to buy machinery from outside the country.
Venezuelans
and parts
apparently
to keep them
are
running.
amassing thousands of computers in the so-called mining process of this imaginary currency.
Yes. But it's not the issue is not the computers. It's the use of the electricity.
Right.
And that's because electricity is given away for free. But you have the same problem in many other countries. You have the same problem in, as an example, in Russia, where they're thinking about trying to subsidize the electricity. Right now, Bitcoin is produced predominantly in countries where electricity is very cheap, because that's the main expense of producing a Bitcoin.
Well, so Bitcoin is a parallel currency to a national currency issued by the central bank of that country. In our country, we have the Federal Reserve System issuing green rectangles. What would it take here in Chattanooga area, Sam Spade, for Bitcoin or alternative currencies to have a spike in interest and a spike in demand? Is there anything possible that could happen here that would bring that about?
Well, now let me be sure I underline what I'm going to say in the answer. The spike in price, because Bitcoin is a global currency, that spike can be caused by demand increases anywhere. All right. Your question is what would make the demand in Chattanooga suddenly spike?
The demand, the price would be separate.
Right. And that would be an increase in inflation or an increase in the government's willingness or determination to regulate how we spend our money or whether we can send money overseas. To take an example, currency controls. We've had currency controls in the past at the border in this country on a number of occasions. If they implement those currency controls again, make it hard for you to send money overseas to buy things, Bitcoin will suddenly explode and become very popular in Chattanooga.
This is David Tulis, caller. You're live on the air. What's on your mind?
Hello, Russell. My name is John, sir. I'm calling from the Financial Relief Center. How are you doing today, sir?
Okay, this was not a call for you, my listener. Sorry. All right, so Sam, there is a prospect of Bitcoin demand here rising if there were problems with the dollar, problems with the banking sector, or fear. Right, fear of
yes.
the system would drive up demand for this currency that you could have. You could have this currency on a thumb drive.
Well, actually, you can have it on a piece of paper. You can have it in your mind. There's actually ways you can keep Bitcoin just by remembering the code.
That sounds very complicated, Sam.
Bitcoin is not a simple thing. It's not as like gold. If you have gold, you've got a coin in your hand. There's nothing complex about that. It's a little piece of metal sitting in your hand. But the disadvantage of that is because it's physically sitting in your hand, you can only transact with it with somebody else that you physically face. That's a real reality. Bitcoin is on the other side of that. It's like gold and equity, but it is purely electronic, and that makes it much more complicated. And that's one of the disadvantages of Bitcoin. It takes some effort to learn.
So, Sam Spade, my listener needs to come away from what we're saying with some simple ideas. One, I would guess would be cartels are bad. Government sponsored businesses or controls are bad, and we need to find ways of getting around them, especially when they cause
absolutely
financial distress.
Absolutely.
Anything else?
Come to the Bitcoin meeting if you want to find out more. Fourth Tuesday of every month. We love beginners. Downtown Public Library. You can look it up and meetup. There's a Bitcoin Chattanooga Bitcoin and meetup.
The next one is in October.
In October.
This is David Tulis. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Sam Spade is here, as you hear, the Bitcoin meetup coordinator. David Tulis, Nooga Radio. I've got some important messages. Hang on.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio.